The diner sat like a fossil in the white nothing, half buried by years that never happened. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a pale glow that made the chrome gleam and the vinyl cushions look wet even though they were bone dry. It smelled faintly of bleach, burnt toast, and something older. Dust in the vents, maybe. Or memory. Casey moved in total silence. She wiped down a counter that didn't need wiping, checked the thermostat, turned the coffee maker off, then on again. Her movements were smooth, practiced. She didn't glance at what she was doing. She never did. She'd done it all 1,000 times, maybe more. The door was locked, but the open sign flickered anyway. Not bright, just enough to cast a faint red ghost across the linoleum floor. Outside, the world was gray, not overcast, hollow, as if the sun had stepped out for a smoke and forgotten to come back. Clouds hung low, but not heavy. Nothing was moving. No wind, no birds. Not even the electrical hum of passing trucks on the highway. Then, one snowflake, small, sharp-edged, and it landed on the window with a microscopic tick. Then another. Casey didn't react. She poured a cup of coffee and set it gently on the counter. No customer, no plate. Just the mug. Steam rose like a thread. She waited a moment, then placed a napkin beneath it, straightened it, and turned it just so. The clock above the register said 3:17. She glanced at it once, blinked slow, and moved on. The radio on the back shelf clicked on without her touching it. Static, thick, and layered. A long moment passed. Then music. Old and scratchy. A hymn. The soul that on Jesus hath leaned for repose. Her eyes shifted to the speaker. No surprise, just recognition. She turned at the dial and the music snapped off. Silence again. She stared out the front windows as the snow picked up. No traffic, no taillights. Just white beginning to settle into the edges of the frame. Casey touched the counter lightly with one hand. Her fingers lingered like she was reading something beneath the formica. "They'll be here soon," she said. Her voice was quiet, not soft. She turned back to the coffee pot and refilled the untouched cup. It hadn't cooled. The bell above the door gave a brittle jingle, almost embarrassed by the suddenness of the cold that followed. Frank Dalton shoved his way inside like the weather had chased him. He stood in the doorway for a second, thick breath fogging up his glasses, parka coated in a crust of snow that hadn't had time to melt. He looked around. The place was too clean, too still. "Ah, damn road's a death trap," he said mostly to himself. "Whiteout came out of nowhere. Damn near drove into a ditch." He stomped his boots against the mat, more habit than necessity. The snow slid off like it was already dead. He rubbed his hands together, muttering, and scanned the place like he didn't trust it. Casey was at the counter before he even saw her. "Coffee?" she asked, not like a question. Frank paused. Something about her tone scratched at the back of his neck. "Yeah, sure." He dropped onto the stool with a grunt. She poured without looking. Steam rolled upward. He took a sip, hissed, and set it down. "Hot." "Supposed to be," Casey said. The bell jingled again. This time two came in. A tall man with a short temper and a teenage girl trying hard not to cry or yell. Or both. "I am slowing down. I can't see a thing." They stumbled through the door like they'd been pushed. Riley's hoodie was soaked, and clinging to her arms, the cuffs already frozen. William looked like he hadn't taken a full breath since they left wherever they came from. He was dressed like a man, still pretending the storm was a detour, not a threat. Riley peeled off her gloves and shook out her fingers. "Christ, I can't feel my hands." "Watch your mouth," William snapped, brushing snow off his coat with a sharp, jerking motion. "You're lucky I let you drive at all." Riley opened her mouth to respond, saw Casey watch it, and shut it again. "Sit," said Casey, not unkindly. Riley slid into the corner booth without a word. William stood stiff for a moment before following. Casey brought them coffee without asking. 3 mugs again. One stayed at the counter. "Thanks," Riley muttered. William said nothing. Outside, the snow had gone from polite to predatory. Visibility was gone. Just a wall of white pressing against the windows, swirling with a strange, almost rhythmic movement. Like breath. Frank turned in his stool to look. His face was pale. "I've seen snow like this up in Alberta. But even that... This is different. It's too quiet." William rubbed his hands together near the cup. "You got a phone? Our cells are dead." "No landline. Storm knocked it out earlier," Casey said. William narrowed his eyes. "You don't have a radio? Something?" She shook her head. He looked like he wanted to press it, but didn't. Frank stood again, staring at the storm. "This came on fast. Like, biblical fast." Casey didn't look up. "Faster than normal?" He turned toward her, about to ask something, then thought better of it. A silence settled, long enough to become noticeable. The untouched cup of coffee at the counter still steamed. No one had claimed it. Frank had just started in on his second cup when the TV in the corner of the diner flickered to life. No one had touched it. It buzzed, loud and staticky, picture rolling out like old film. Riley jumped in her seat. William turned, eyebrows furrowed. Casey just stood at the counter, staring at nothing, like she'd known it was coming. The image struggled, warped between black and white bars, then clearer. A news anchor's face, tight-lipped and pale. His suit was askew, tie loosened like someone had yanked on it mid-broadcast. "Unseasonal Arctic conditions, expanding faster than predicted. Entire swaths of counties are under whiteout emergency." Behind him, a map filled the screen. Red and orange alerts bloomed outward like bruises. The camera jittered, then flickered again. The anchor continued, voice thin and warped through the bad signal. "Authorities advise shelter in place. Visibility at 0. Rescue crews are unable to respond. This is not a typical weather pattern." Frank stood now, arms crossed. "Well, no shit." The screen cut to static for a beat, then back on the anchor. But his face had changed. Sharper now, eyes wider. The background behind him, a window, maybe, was all white. "Some are reporting phenomena. Lights in the storm, figures moving through the snow. Unconfirmed, remain indoors and remain calm." William stepped forward. "Turn it off." Riley didn't move. No one touched it. The TV glitched, horizontal lines tearing across the screen, then blinked off. Just black. No standby light, like it had never been on at all. No one spoke. The only sound was the slow drip, drip, drip of melted snow off of Frank's boots. William cleared his throat too loud. "It's panic media. They always blow things out of proportion." Frank looked over at him like he'd grown another head. "Buddy, we can't even see the road. And you heard him. Rescue's not coming." "It's a freak storm," William muttered. Riley laughed once, low and sharp. "You think this is just weather?" Her voice cracked at the end. They all looked at her. She stared into her coffee like it might show something different. Outside, the wind howled, long and low, like a horn echoing across a frozen lake. By nightfall, the storm was a wall. No moon, no stars, just blank, endless white. The diner windows looked like frosted glass on a morgue drawer. Shapes shifted in them, but maybe it was just the light, or the wind, or something was trying to find a way in. The heat was failing. Casey stoked the back room oven and brought out another pot of coffee. She moved the same way she had before, efficient, quiet, unbothered, like she was working her shift during a slow night, not during what might have been the end of the world. There were 5 people now. A young man named Jonah had stumbled in an hour ago. Early 20s, student type. Backpack still strapped tight, jeans soaked up to the knees. He hadn't stopped shaking once. This ain't natural, Jonah said, eyes darting between the windows and the door like something was going to break through. It wasn't like this a few hours ago. I was driving. Roads were bad, but not this. And then it just slammed it down on everything. He kept checking his phone. Still no signal, no bars, no time even. The display blinked 0000, then went black. William tried to take control, of course. He organized inventory, and took count of canned food, rationed sugar like they were in a bunker. Frank ignored him, sat at the corner booth, chewing on jerky like a man waiting for the world to make sense again. Jonah didn't last the night. He stood up. I'm going, he said, slinging his backpack on again. This storm ends somewhere, and I'm not dying in a diner. Riley sat up. Don't be stupid. You saw the news. That wasn't the news. You think that was real? You think any of this is real? I'm done playing along. William stood too. Hey, let's talk about this. Jonah didn't wait. He went to the door and wrenched it open. The wind didn't blow in. It slid in, like something crawling. Cold poured across the floor in sheets. The bell above the door didn't ring. He stepped outside. They saw him walk into the white, swallowed foot by foot. Casey returned with the water pitcher, eyes narrowing slightly. Where is he? No one answered. Riley moved to the window. I can still see him. They all crowded in behind her. He was out there, barely. A dark figure pacing toward the road. Moving faster now, then running. Wait, Riley whispered. He's coming back. Jonah was sprinting now, back toward the diner. His form flailed against the storm. Something moved behind him, something wrong. It didn't walk, it glided. It flickered forward with every gust of snow, jerking in and out of visibility. One shape, then 3, then none. Then all of them, all at once closing in. Jonah screamed. Riley backed away from the window, hand over her mouth. The scream was cut off halfway. A shape hit the glass. Not Jonah, just blood. Just red smeared across the frost, steaming slightly before freezing into a dark streak. Then silence. William stepped back like he'd been hit. Frank muttered, Jesus. Casey picked up the untouched coffee mug from the counter. She poured it out slowly, steam curling upward into the dark. No one slept that night. Not really. They drifted into silences that weren't rest. More like short deaths. Fractured dozing, eyelids twitching, minds circling the image of Jonah's last moment over and over again like a prayer said wrong. No one talked about it. They didn't need to. The sound of his scream, the way it had stopped mid-breath, mid-word, had done something permanent to the air inside the diner. It had settled into the walls, thick and invisible, like a smoke that wouldn't lift. Outside, the storm hadn't let up. If anything, it had gotten quieter, which somehow made it worse. No more wind hammering the glass, no banshee wails through the vents. Just a slow, patient hush, as if the blizzard had eaten well and was now digesting. Riley sat curled in a corner booth, knees up, arms wrapped around herself. Her coat was zipped high, covering half her face, but you could still see the way her eyes tracked the window like prey watches a predator. Wide, unblinking, caught somewhere between terror and disbelief. She hadn't moved since Jonah died. Hours ago now, maybe. There was no clock to trust anymore. The one above the register had stopped at 3:17. So had Frank's watch, and so had William's phone. Frank stood at the door for what felt like most of the night. One hand hovered just above the lock, not touching it, but always there, as if contact alone might keep it closed. Or maybe he was waiting for someone else to pry it open, just to see what he'd do. He didn't speak, didn't smoke, just stared through the slit in the frosted glass at the endless swirl of white. William moved like a man haunted by the need to do something, without any idea what that something might be. He paced, back and forth, from the counter to the jukebox and back again. Once he opened his mouth to speak, then closed it. Then again, the second time, his voice caught in his throat like a nail. Eventually, he sat across from Riley. She didn't look at him. He didn't look at her. They stayed that way for hours, or minutes. Time had stopped working. Casey was the only one who moved with any real purpose. She wiped the counter, slowly and methodically, over and over again in the same arc, like polishing a gravestone. Her eyes were distant, not vacant, not panicked, but calm in a way that had started to feel unnatural. She refilled the coffee pot and checked the creamers. She reset the napkin holders like she expected a new crowd to come in at dawn. There would be no dawn. The storm outside pulsed against the windows like a heartbeat. Not pounding, just there, steady and alive. No one cleaned the glass where Jonah's blood had frozen. They couldn't. Riley saw it in her peripheral vision but refused to acknowledge it. If she didn't look, maybe it wouldn't be real. Maybe none of it was. Maybe she'd fall asleep and wake up in her bed, and this would just be another dream she wouldn't talk about. But she didn't sleep. Not really. None of them did. At some point, Frank turned away from the door. He walked to the counter with slow, heavy steps and sat on the same stool he always used. He didn't speak. Casey poured him a coffee without asking. He took it but didn't drink. William eventually put his head down on the table. One arm crossed over his face like a child hiding from a storm. Riley didn't move. She had become a shadow in the shape of a girl. Casey returned to the coffee station and placed a third cup on the counter. It steamed softly like breath. No one had seen her brew it. The overhead lights buzzed gently. The heater wheezed once, then fell silent. A few minutes, or hours later, the jukebox clicked on again. No one moved. The song was slower this time, thicker, almost mournful. He'll never, no, never, never forsake. The lights dimmed just slightly, not enough to be obvious, just enough to remind them this place had its own pulse. And still, the blood on the window stayed frozen. And still, the sun did not rise. The next day came without a beginning. There was no sunrise, no change in the light, just the same leaden gray pressing in from all sides, dim as dusk and cold as breath held too long. They didn't speak of time anymore. There was no point. The clock above the register still read 3:17. William had checked it 3 times in a single hour, or what felt like an hour, but the second hand didn't move. Frank's watch said the same. Riley's phone was dead. When she tried to charge it, the battery icon blinked once, then disappeared. Outside, the snow hadn't stopped, but the windows had frosted so thick that they could only see motion now. Shapes moving in the white, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, sometimes still. No one went near the glass. Inside, they slipped into a rhythm. Not routine. Ritual. Casey cooked in silence. Every morning, if it was morning, she made eggs, toast, and black coffee. She plated them without being asked and slid them down the counter. Always 3 plates, never 4. Frank took to counting his steps from one end of the diner to the other. He didn't say why, just paced slowly, muttering under his breath, like he was trying to measure the edges of something that wouldn't stay still. William started writing in the margins of a water-damaged crossword puzzle he found near the register. Not words, time codes. Day 3? Second loop? Sun? His handwriting got smaller with each entry, more frantic. Riley stayed at her booth. She stopped speaking unless directly spoken to, and even then, her answers came in small, sanded-down syllables. She chewed at the corner of her thumb until it bled, then started again. One night, or what they agreed to call night, the jukebox clicked on by itself again. They were used to it by now. No one flinched. The song was the same. He'll never, no never, no never forsake. It skipped halfway through the verse, then started again. And again. Frank stood slowly, walked over and pulled the plug. The music didn't stop. He stared at the machine, hand still holding the cord. I don't think it's plugged into anything. William looked up from his seat. It's the same song every time. Casey didn't turn from the counter. It's the only one it remembers. What? Riley blinked. Casey turned off the griddle. Some songs don't let go easy. No one responded. Later, Frank sat in the booth by the window, the one no one else used anymore. It was quieter there. Quieter in the way that danger sometimes is. He ran his fingers over the edge of the table, paused. Scratched into the laminate, barely visible, was a number. 5. He frowned and checked the next booth. Also 5. And the one behind that, and the one behind that. Frank stood. He moved to the other side of the diner, same thing. Every booth was number 5. He went back to the counter and didn't say anything for a full minute, then went to Casey. Were these always labeled? She didn't look up. Only when you're counting. What does that mean? She turned to him and smiled. Not cold, not warm, just enough to say, that's all you get. In the freezer that night, Riley found a can of soup that didn't exist in any brand she recognized. Plain white label, black lettering. Repentance. She turned it over in her hand once. No ingredients, no barcode, no expiration date. Just that one word. Like a command. The door opened behind her. Cold flooded in from colder. A soft click of boots. The faint smell of coffee and something like dust. Casey stepped inside and closed the door gently behind her. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the overhead fan vibrated quietly, like a distant throat trying not to clear itself. Riley's breath misted faintly in the dim light. Casey didn't seem to breathe at all. Riley held up the can, voice flat. Is this your idea of a joke? Casey didn't answer. Riley set the can down on the metal shelf harder than she meant to. The clang echoed in the steel box around them. It isn't funny. It's not clever or deep or whatever this place is trying to be. Casey tilted her head. You think the diner's trying to say something to you? I think something is. I don't know. She turned around and leaned against the shelving, arms crossed. Her hoodie looked too thin for the cold, but she didn't shiver. Why does it feel like we're being watched? Not just by the snow, by this place, like it's waiting for something. Something from us. Casey leaned against the opposite wall. Places remember people. That's not what I asked. I know. Riley stared at her for a long second, then looked away. Another silence. Thicker this time, deeper. When Riley spoke again, her voice cracked like thin ice. My mom was in the back seat. Casey didn't react. Riley stared at a crack in the freezer floor. It was my fault. I was driving. My dad let me because he wanted to show he could trust me again. We were fighting before, all of us, and she was crying. Her hands started to shake, but she didn't notice. It was raining, not like this, just steady, cold. I took a turn too fast and we slid. I tried to steer out of it, but my dad, he panicked. He grabbed the wheel. He didn't trust me. She swallowed. We went off the road into the ditch. It was steep. The car flipped once and maybe twice. I blacked out. Casey's eyes stayed on her, soft and unmoving. When I woke up, she wasn't breathing. Riley's voice was barely audible now. The front was crushed in. My dad was... He wasn't moving either. But she was in the back. And she had blood on her face, and I kept thinking she wasn't even supposed to be in the car. She blinked hard. Tears welled, then spilled over, slow and angry. She wasn't supposed to be there. And you lived. Yeah. More tears. She didn't wipe them away. I keep thinking about that moment right before we lost control. If I hadn't been looking at the dashboard or adjusting the mirror or something, if I had just focused. The silence again. The kind that hurts in your ears. I see her face sometimes. In the snow. In the window, just for a second. Then it's gone, like it never happened. She looked up at Casey now, eyes rimmed red but defiant. You think I'm crazy? Casey shook her head. No. You think it was my fault? Casey took a long breath before answering. I think guilt is heavier than most things we carry, and harder to set down. Riley let out a sharp, wet laugh. That's a non-answer. I know, Casey said. Riley turned her back to the wall, and slid down slowly until she was sitting on the cold floor. Casey didn't move. I miss her, Riley said, almost inaudibly. Even though it's my fault she's not here. She pressed her fists into her eyes. I miss her so much, I forget what she sounded like. Casey knelt across from her. You ever tell her you were sorry? Riley shook her head. I didn't get to. I thought she was mad at me, and then she was gone. Casey placed a hand on Riley's shoulder, warm and steady. You might still have the chance. What does that mean? But Casey was already standing, already walking to the door. She opened it without answering. Before she stepped down, she turned back. Eat something. You're still here. Then she was gone. The next morning, if it was morning, William found a salt shaker in the freezer. He stood there for a long time, holding it in his hand, and turning it over like maybe it would make sense from a different angle. It didn't. He set it down and backed out slowly, as if expecting something else to be misplaced, or waiting for the freezer to change shape while his back was turned. Back in the diner, Casey was already making coffee. Riley sat at her usual booth, face unreadable, hands wrapped around her cup like it might melt through her fingers if she let go. She didn't look up when William entered. Frank was dozing in his corner, a dish towel draped over his eyes. William stood in the center of the diner and said, "Someone moved the salt." No one answered. He waited. Casey flipped the burner on and cracked 2 eggs. Why would the salt be in the freezer? Cold storage. Don't do that. Don't act like this is normal. Casey didn't flinch. Riley took a sip of coffee, still not looking at him. William rubbed a hand down his face and started pacing. This place isn't just off. It's wrong. Things don't stay where you leave them. My notebook had new pages in it this morning, handwriting that wasn't mine. He went to the booth near the window and yanked the notebook out from under the napkin holder and flipped it open. Blank. The pages were clean. He blinked. I swear I... He turned page after page. Nothing. No notes, no timestamps, just empty lines. I wrote in this. I did. No one challenged him. Frank stirred, mumbling something unintelligible, then went still again. William let out a shaky breath. He walked over to the wall near the restrooms, ran his hand along the faded wallpaper. There was a spot where it didn't line up, like 2 layers pasted over each other. He pressed it. The surface gave slightly under his palm, like damp plaster. He stepped back. The jukebox clicked on. He'll never, no never forsake. William spun toward it. Turn it off! No one moved. He walked over and yanked the cord again, which somehow plugged itself back. The music kept playing. He kicked the machine and it stopped immediately, as if waiting. He stared at it, breathing hard, then turned to Casey. Where are we? Casey stirred cream into a mug, slow and deliberate. It's a diner. This isn't a diner, he said, his voice brittle. Diners don't bend. Diners don't watch. Casey looked up at him just once. Her eyes were calm. Too calm. You're unraveling, she said gently. What? You've been holding tight since the moment you got here. Counting things, timing, managing. He felt suddenly exposed, like she'd read a file on him while he slept. You thought if you could just keep everyone busy, it wouldn't fall apart. But it's not falling apart. You are. William's mouth opened and closed. No words came out. Riley looked up at him then. Her voice was hoarse. She's right. He stared at them both, then at the notebook in his hand. The blank pages. The page numbers had disappeared too. He dropped it. Casey brought him coffee, but he didn't drink it. Outside, the storm pulsed, brightening once. Just once. Like a camera flash from far away. Like someone taking a picture of the inside of the diner. The snow didn't make a sound anymore. It used to. In the beginning, whatever that meant, it growled like a hungry thing, clawed at the windows, screamed when it didn't get in. Now it just rested. Covered the world like ash. A soft burial. Nothing above, nothing below. Casey wiped the counter again. The rag was clean. The counter was clean. It didn't matter. The motion helped. She liked the rhythm of it. The familiarity. She had long since stopped pretending it was about hygiene. The jukebox clicked. No music this time, just a mechanical sigh, like it had forgotten what song it was supposed to play. She looked over at Riley asleep in the booth again, head against the window. She twitched in her sleep sometimes. Casey could never tell if it was the dream starting or ending. Frank snored lightly in the corner, face buried in his arm. William was at his table, pretending to write. The pencil had no lead. They were close. Closer than most. Casey refilled the coffee pot. No one had asked for it. They didn't need to. Sometimes she tried to remember how long she'd been here. She never could. It was like trying to remember the beginning of a dream after you've already woken up 3 times inside of it. She'd wiped this same counter 1,000 times. Maybe more. The same plates, the same mugs, the same cold that didn't seep into her bones anymore. There had been others before them. So many others. Faces she half remembered. Regrets that hung in the air long after their voices were gone. Some stayed too long. Some never figured it out. Some never even knew what they were being asked to face. This group was different. They felt different. She reached into her apron pocket and pulled out a small silver ring. Just held it for a while. Turned it over in her fingers. She didn't wear it anymore. Didn't need to. She poured a fresh cup of coffee and set it on the counter. 5th cup. Always one more than needed. He would show up and claim it eventually. It used to bother her, that empty place, the waiting. Not anymore. She looked out at the snow. Sometimes she saw things in it. Shapes, flickers of light, the soft silhouettes of hands pressed to glass that weren't there. She never flinched. Let the others see monsters. She knew what the storm really was. A filter, a sieve. It didn't want to hurt them. It just wanted to know who could move on and who still needed more time. She touched the formica. The heat from the cup had already left a faint ring. "This is my last cycle," she said aloud, but softly. There was no one to hear. "I've done my penance. I've helped enough move on after this." She meant it. She'd never said it aloud before, but tonight it felt true. She turned back to the room. Riley stirred. Frank muttered something in his sleep. William's hand paused mid-scribble, then kept moving. Casey smiled. Almost. Then she turned back to the window and waited for the shape to appear again. It always came before the end. The storm hadn't stopped, but Riley noticed something different when she woke up. It was quiet, the same as always, but not the same kind of quiet. Not heavy, not choking, just still. She sat up in her booth, stretching slow. Her body ached the way it did after a long cry or a fever breaking. Her hoodie was damp from where she curled into herself, but she didn't feel cold. Casey had left a glass of water on the table and a biscuit, fresh and still warm. Riley blinked at it, surprised. Not by the gesture. Casey always took care of them, but by how hungry she suddenly felt. She ate it without thinking. The warmth filled her chest before her stomach. It felt like something small inside her had unclenched. She didn't cry. She didn't smile either. But for the first time since the crash, she didn't feel like she needed to disappear. Casey lay on her back behind the counter, wrapped in a thick olive green sleeping bag. A candle flickered beside her. the flame barely disturbed by the draft that slipped in under the front door. The windows were fogged. The snow was still falling outside in a slow, endless hush. In her hands was a battered paperback, faded, dog-eared, spine long broken. Dante's Inferno. She read by candlelight, the pages glowing faintly, her eyes moving slow and deliberate over the verse, like she'd read it before, like she'd been there. Footsteps approached. Not rushed, not uncertain, just heavy and tired. William stepped around the counter and peered down at her. "You reading bedtime stories from hell now?" he asked, a ghost of a smirk tugging at one corner of his mouth. Casey turned a page. "Some nights call for it." He nodded, then slowly lowered himself to the floor beside her. It wasn't graceful. His knees popped, his back groaned, but he settled in without complaint. For a while they just sat there, candle between them, snow on the other side of the world. William ran a hand down his face. "You ever notice the way the silence here isn't empty?" Casey didn't look away from her book. "It listens." "Yeah, that's what it feels like." He leaned back against the counter. His voice was soft when it came again. "She thinks I don't trust her." Casey closed the book. "I do. Or I want to. I never figured out how to let go. Not after what happened to her mom. I thought if I kept control of everything, I could keep her safe." Casey didn't speak. William rubbed his eyes with the heels of his hands. "I remember when Riley was 5. She used to hide under the kitchen table when she gets scared. Thought if she couldn't see the thunder and the lightning, it couldn't get her. And that was her logic." He smiled, just barely. It faded fast. "She doesn't hide under tables anymore. She hides behind being angry, behind sarcasm. And I keep pushing, thinking I'm helping, but all I'm doing is pushing her further away." Casey's voice was gentle. "What are you afraid of?" "That I ruined her," he said. No hesitation. No breath between the question and the truth. "That I couldn't stop the crash, that I was the one who panicked, that if I had just let her steer?" He trailed off and shook his head. "She blames herself." The candlelight danced in the silence that followed. The jukebox clicked faintly in the corner but didn't play. William's voice cracked. "I love her. More than anything, but I don't know how to show her that without turning it into a leash." He turned to Casey. "I never wanted to control her. I wanted her to survive, that's all." Casey looked at him. Not with pity, not with judgment. With recognition. "She knows." William laughed, bitter and small. "You think so?" "I do." He looked away. "I don't know how to fix it." Casey leaned back, eyes closed now. "Maybe fixing it isn't the point." William didn't answer. He just sat there. A man who had built his whole life around protecting someone and had no idea how to let her grow up. The candle burned lower. Eventually, Casey opened her eyes and looked at him again. "You're not a bad father. You're just a scared one." William closed his eyes. "Yeah," he whispered. "I am." They sat in the quiet for a long time after that. Nothing outside but snow. Nothing inside but two people finally stopping. And for the first time in what felt like forever, William didn't feel like he had to fix anything. The candle had burned down to a stub by the time William drifted into sleep. Casey didn't move. She sat there long after his breathing slowed, long after the flame guttered out. Her hand rested lightly on the cover of Inferno, the spine folded shut but still worn from her lap. The diner was quiet, but not empty. Never empty. Outside, the storm pulsed, once, like a heartbeat. Like something large had just inhaled. The next time Riley opened her eyes, the diner was full. But it wasn't this diner. The lights were too bright. The booths were a different color. The clock above the register wasn't stopped at 3:17. It ticked loud and steady. The people were different, too. Frank was younger, clean-shaven, wearing a postal uniform instead of his trucker's jacket. Casey was still behind the counter, but her hair was longer, darker. She wore glasses. A man sat at the window booth, one Riley didn't recognize. His face was soft and kind. He smiled at her like he knew her, like he'd known her for a long time. Then he opened his mouth and said her name, but no sound came out. Just snow. It poured in from his mouth, slow and soundless, spilling over his teeth, flooding his lap, drifting onto the floor like smoke made solid. Riley turned around, and the Inferno clock now read 3:17. The storm returned. The booths turned back red, and she woke up. She sat bolt upright in her booth, heart pounding. No one else had stirred. Frank was still curled in the corner. William and Casey were still behind the counter, sleeping shoulder to shoulder like old friends at a war front. She rubbed her eyes and checked the clock. 3:17. Of course. Later that day, if it was a day, Frank stood in the middle of the diner, hands on hips, looking around like someone who'd misplaced a door. This is gonna sound crazy, but I feel like I've been here before. William looked up from his coffee. You have? No, not like that. I mean, this day, this exact setup. Casey behind the counter, Riley looking out the window. You scribbling into a crossword like a lunatic? I'm not scribbling. Yeah, well, you're not solving anything either. Frank turned in a slow circle. I had this same conversation, word for word. Maybe a week ago, maybe yesterday. I can't tell anymore. Riley spoke from her booth without turning around. Have the booths always been red? William frowned. Yes? I don't think they were in my dream. Frank sat down hard. There was a dream. It felt more real than this. Casey said nothing. She was filling mugs again, her movements as practiced and patient as always. But Riley caught it. The song she was humming. Familiar, not from the jukebox, not from the TV, from home. Her mother used to hum that when she cleaned the kitchen, when Riley was small, back when everything still made sense. Where did you hear that? Riley asked sharply. Casey stopped moving. What? That song, that song you were humming. I don't remember humming, she said softly. Then she turned back to the coffee and kept pouring. That night, just before the lights flickered, the storm paused again. Not stopped. Paused. Like someone had lifted their finger off a record player. The air outside the window froze. Not in temperature, in motion. Snowflakes hovered mid-fall. A dark shape stood just beyond the glass. Not close enough to see clearly, not far enough to ignore. Riley looked up and whispered, Mom? But when she blinked, the shape was gone. The snow had stopped falling, just stopped. It didn't taper off, it didn't blow in sideways and retreat, it simply froze. 1,000 flakes suspended like dust in an old attic. as if someone had hit pause on the world. Inside the diner, no one spoke. Riley noticed it first. "It's still," she'd whispered. Now Frank stood at the window, blinking like he wasn't sure what he was seeing. William was the one who moved. He stepped forward slowly, boots quiet on the tile. His hand hovered over the latch of the front door. "What are you doing?" Frank asked, not taking his eyes off the snow. "Just looking," William said. Riley stood now too. "Don't." William's fingers closed on the handle. Casey, behind the counter, didn't raise her voice. "William?" He hesitated. She didn't say more. Just his name, like a warning, like a prayer. "I need to know if it's real. This stillness, it could mean something." He pulled the door open. The snow resumed instantly. It didn't fall. It plunged. The quiet shattered as a wall of wind slammed into the diner's threshold, ripping through the silence with a sound like tearing fabric. Flakes poured down in torrents, blinding and furious. A roar of white filled the doorway. The lights flickered and the jukebox clicked. Riley gasped and stumbled back. William slammed the door shut, but Casey was already there, pushing it closed with one hand. The other pressed gently against his chest like a mother stopping a child from walking into traffic. Her voice was calm and final. "It's not time." The storm roared again. Hours had passed since William opened the door, maybe more. Time didn't move properly in the diner anymore, as if it ever did. But the snow had returned with a vengeance. Wind slicing sideways, white piling like dust in a forgotten room. The windows are frosted so thick they were nearly opaque. Frank, restless, stood near the front again. He'd cleared a palm-sized circle in the window, just enough to peek out. Maybe hoping, maybe expecting nothing. Then he froze. "Someone's out there," he whispered. Riley was immediately up, heart in her throat. "What?" William moved beside them, squinting into the ice-smudged glass. There, at the edge of the lot, stood a figure. Not stumbling, not running, just standing. His coat fluttered lightly in the wind, but he himself didn't seem moved by it at all. No gloves, no hat, no visible breath. He didn't wave, didn't shout, just watched. Riley's voice broke the silence. "Is he staring at us?" The figure took a step, then another, then another. Not fast, not slow, just steady, purposeful. Like he knew exactly how far he had to go and exactly how much time it would take to get there. Frank pressed both hands to the glass. "That man's gonna freeze to death out there or be taken by those things." Casey stood behind the counter, still as ever, eyes locked on the window. Riley turned toward her. "Do you know him?" Casey didn't answer. Outside, the stranger continued forward. His movements didn't change, even as the snow went sideways, even as the wind pulled violently at his coat. He moved like he didn't feel it, like it wasn't there at all. He reached the middle of the lot, paused, took one more step, then he dropped. Not like someone hit by something, not like Jonah. He folded, quietly. One knee buckled, then the other. Then he collapsed face first into the snow. Riley gasped. "Shit," Frank muttered. "He's down. He's not moving." William stepped back from the window, hand going to the door instinctively. "We can't just watch him die." "Then don't," Casey said. Her voice was soft but unmistakable. They all turned toward her. She didn't move. She just kept watching the snow. The wind hadn't let up since the stranger fell. He lay motionless just a few yards from the door, face down in the snow, dark coat rising and falling slowly with each shallow breath. If not for that tiny motion, they might have thought he was already dead. Inside the diner was a vacuum of indecision. Frank stood closest to the door, one hand on the handle, the other balled into a fist at his side. "We just gonna leave him out there?" he asked, not accusing, just flat, tired. William sat at the counter, elbows on his knees, jaw locked tight. "We don't know who he is." "He's freezing, that's who he is," Riley snapped. "He walked through this storm like it didn't touch him. Then he dropped like a puppet with its strings cut. You really think that's normal?" William said. "No, but since when has anything been normal?" Silence. The wind pressed against the glass again. A low, slow moan. Not angry, just patient. Frank looked at Casey. "Got anything for us here?" Casey stood behind the counter, quiet, calm as always. Her gaze never left the stranger's form in the snow. "I serve coffee. I don't make decisions." That landed like a bell in a cathedral. Frank turned back to the others. "We let Jonah die. We stood at this window and watched him scream until he didn't. I ain't doing that again." "He's not Jonah," William said. Frank rounded on him. "No, he's not. But I am." "What are you talking about?" "I'm the guy who runs. Always have been. Run from jobs, run from family, from everything that mattered. You think I haven't seen this before? Every time I sit on my hands and convince myself it's someone else's problem." Riley looked up at him, something shifting in her expression. "You tried to help Jonah. We stopped you. That was our mistake." He took a breath. "This time, I'm not going to be the one sitting when it ends." He reached for his coat and pulled it on, fastened the zipper with slow, deliberate hands. He stepped to the door. Casey didn't try to stop him. She just watched. Not sad, not smiling. She silently prepared a fresh cup of coffee. The door opened with a heavy groan. The storm didn't roar this time, it parted. Frank stepped out into the white. Behind him, the diner held its breath. And then he was gone. Barely visible. The cold hit him like a wall, but he didn't flinch. Frank moved through the snow with his head down, hands bare, boots sinking deep into the powder that never stopped piling. The wind clawed at his throat, but he kept walking, breath ragged but steady. The stranger lay still, just 20 feet from the diner, face turned toward the ground, half buried now, like the storm was trying to erase him. Frank knelt beside him. His knees sank instantly, snow filling the cuffs of his jeans. "All right, come on," he muttered, hooking his arms under the man's shoulders. "I didn't walk through hell to play dead man carry with you." The stranger groaned softly. His eyelids fluttered, but he didn't speak. Frank gritted his teeth and lifted. The wind howled harder now. Not everywhere, just behind him. Something was coming. Not fast, not loud, but inevitable. He dragged the man step by step, boots slipping, breath steaming. The diner seemed farther away than before, like the parking lot had stretched while no one was looking. He didn't stop. Each footfall was heavier than the last, like the snow didn't want him to give up. 10 feet. 5. Shapes moved in the storm, not close yet, but circling. Frank pulled the man the last few steps and shoved him hard through the doorway. The stranger hit the tile floor inside, limp but breathing. Frank didn't follow. Something grabbed him. No sound, no scream. Just a violent blur of white and shadow. His coat disappeared first. Then his arm. Then nothing. The door slammed shut behind him. The stranger sat upright with the ease of someone getting out of bed after a long nap. His coat was soaked, boots caked in snowmelt, but there was no urgency in his movements. He blinked once slowly, as if reacclimating to the air inside the diner. Riley flinched when he looked at her, not because he seemed dangerous. He didn't. But because something in his eyes suggested he'd already been here before. Not today, not just this week. Before. William stood frozen behind the counter, one hand gripping the edge like it might anchor him to the floor. Riley stayed crouched beside the stranger, unsure whether to back away or help him to stand. She didn't need to choose. The stranger rose on his own, joints popping lightly, face passive. He brushed the snow from his sleeves with mechanical precision, then looked around the room like someone checking to see if the furniture had been rearranged in their absence. "About time," he said, voice hoarse but casual. "Thought we'd never get here. You finally pulled me out." He looked between the two of them, eyes lingering on Riley. "Took a while, this loop." Riley blinked. "What are you talking about?" "You saved me," he said simply. "Well, Frank did. That was the difference this time. Selflessness is rare around here." He finally stopped running, gave something up. That's all it ever takes. William stepped forward, slow and careful, like the stranger might vanish if he moved too quickly. "You're saying Frank saved you?" The stranger nodded. "That's right. Most of the time, he doesn't. Most of the time, he watches or hides. But this time, he chose someone else. That's penance. That's enough." Riley stood now, staring at him. "Who are you?" He tilted his head. "Right now? Doesn't matter. I'm not the story. I'm the one who gets to leave." He walked to the counter, running a finger along the edge. "Feels like it's been years, doesn't it? That's the trick of it. Time's not real here. Just wait, thought, and regret. You stay as long as you carry it." William looked toward the window. "So, what now?" The stranger turned to face them fully. "Now, it's just the two of you left." Riley stepped back like she'd been slapped. "What do you mean?" He took a slow breath as if savoring it. "Frank's gone. Moved on. And Casey's not like you. She'll finish her work soon, but this place, this pocket, this diner, it's for you. Has been all along." Neither of them spoke. The stranger's smile faded a little. "You don't remember yet? That's fine." He stepped forward, gentle as fog, and reached out with both hands, one toward Riley, one toward William. His fingertips barely touched their foreheads. Neither of them moved. The second the stranger touched them, the diner fell away. No noise, no flash of light, just absence. Like waking from a long, long dream and realizing you never truly knew what waking felt like until now. Riley was in the car again. Rain on the windshield, her hands on the steering wheel. Tight, white-knuckled. The road blurred and narrow. Her heart pounding, throat thick with things she hadn't said. Her dad in the passenger seat barking directions, not angry, but afraid. She shouted back. They always fought when they were scared. In the back, her mom was crying. Not loud, not sobbing, just breathing sharp and fast like she couldn't catch the right kind of air. The tires slid. Just a little at first. Enough to make her flinch. She tried to correct it, and William grabbed the wheel, and that was it. The car left the road, spun once, maybe twice, hit the ditch sideways. The sound was wrong. No crunch, no glass, just a thud like something huge and soft swallowing them whole. She remembered her face hid in the window, remembered her father yelling her name, remembered the way her mother screamed and then stopped. The next thing she remembered was cold. William saw the same, but from the passenger seat. He remembered Riley's hand shaking, remembered wanting to say something calm and didn't. He remembered thinking she was too young, too reckless, and too emotional, and then reaching over before he had the right to. The panic in his gut told him to take control. That's what he always did. That's how he kept people alive. But this time, control didn't save anyone. He remembered the moment he grabbed the wheel, and in doing so, he took everything else. They were back in the diner again. But it felt different now. Lighter. The air didn't press their skin like it used to, and it didn't judge them anymore. William sank into a chair without speaking. Riley stood frozen, eyes glassy, mouth open, but no sound coming out. They looked at each other. No blame, no regret, just truth. He stood. She walked into him. No drama, no tears, just two people who have been holding their breath for too long, finally letting it go. He held her like a father should. And she didn't pull away. Across the room, the stranger smiled softly, then turned his attention elsewhere. Riley stood behind the counter, the same place she'd been for every moment of this strange, looping half-life. But now she wasn't moving. Her hands rested on the rim of the sink, her eyes not focused on anything in particular. For the first time since Riley had arrived, the coffee pot was empty and no one was refilling it. Riley noticed it first. She stepped forward slowly, unsure of what she was seeing, and then William followed, saying nothing. Casey looked at them both and smiled. Small, real, and tired. Not the kind of tired that needed sleep. The kind that comes at the end of a long, long duty. "You did it," she said. Neither of them responded right away. Riley took a breath, as if she might cry, but didn't. "I've been here a long time," Casey continued. "Not trapped, just waiting, helping. This place, it holds on to people who aren't ready, who don't know how to let go. You learn to guide them, one at a time. Sometimes it works, most of the time it doesn't." She glanced toward the door without turning her body. But this time was different. William stepped closer. "You always knew what this place was?" Casey nodded. "I didn't at first, just like you. But after a while it starts to make sense. The routine, the way the snow never really stops. The hymns, the coffee, the silence." "You stayed behind to help people," Riley said. Her voice wasn't a question. "That was my penance. Now it's over." She looked down at her hands, turning them slightly. Light crept into the diner. Not from outside, but from within. Not bright, just warm, like the morning sun through old blinds. Casey exhaled softly. "You were worth the wait." She didn't shimmer. She didn't fade in a burst of light. She just started to soften at the edges, like fog burning off at dawn. Her figure held its shape, but it grew transparent, quiet as breath. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon and something older, like the very last page of a beloved book. And then she was gone. The diner was still. Not quiet the way it had been before, The breath-holding, time-breaking silence that clung to the walls during the storm. But truly still, as if the room had finally exhaled. The storm was gone. Outside the windows, where once there had been only white, there was now a soft pale light. Not sunrise, not heaven, just something clear, unburdened. The stranger stood by the door, one hand resting gently on the frame. He didn't look eager to leave, just ready. Calm in the way that only those who've seen everything can be. William and Riley stood behind him. Changed, but not transformed. They didn't shine, they didn't glow. But something in the way they held themselves had shifted. Like the weight had finally slid off their shoulders and into the floor behind them. Riley was the one who spoke first. "Frank, he didn't have to die." The stranger looked over his shoulder, not with pity, but with respect. "Well, he didn't. But he chose to. He carried his guilt like a curse, ran from it every time. Until this loop. Until you. You said this wasn't the first time." "It never is. But that's the thing about penance. It only works when you stop trying to skip to the end." Frank found peace by giving something up. For once, he didn't run. He made the choice that no one made him make. And us? You didn't have to sacrifice yourselves. You had to face what you were avoiding. Let go of the shame, the blame. The old stories you kept telling yourselves about who ruined what. You remembered. You forgave. That was enough. He opened the door. There was no music, no wind, just light. Not beckoning, but allowing. The stranger turned to them. "You can go now if you want." William looked at Riley. Riley looked back. No nod, no words. They just understood. They stepped outside together. The light didn't engulf them. It accepted them, quiet and whole. Inside the diner, the coffee pot sat empty. The counter was clean. The booths were still. The jukebox was silent for what felt like the first time in years. On the counter sat one last cup of coffee. Steam curled from it, slow and steady. The stranger stepped over to it, picked it up and took a sip. He closed his eyes like it was the first warm thing he'd tasted in a lifetime. Then, with no ceremony, no hesitation, he walked through the door and into the light. The door swung shut behind him. The diner was empty. And at long last, it was quiet. The stranger walked until the cold forgot his name. He'd left nothing behind but footsteps that would fill in before the next ones arrived. The coffee cup stayed warm in his hand, though he hadn't sipped it in a while. It wasn't really about the coffee, it never had been. He thought of Frank, headstrong, bitter, always a half second from turning around. But he hadn't. Not this time. He'd finished the loop. He thought of Riley and William, two broken pieces of the same guilt, finally seeing each other clearly. They hadn't saved him, not exactly, but they'd stopped trying to save themselves in all the wrong ways. And that made all the difference. Up ahead, the light widened into something not quite a road, just space. And in that space, the stranger would wait for the next group of souls that needed to pay their penance.